All right, so imagine walking into this interview for a statistical assistant role, right?
Right.
But you're not just like nervous and like just trying to remember facts and figures, but you really like get it. You understand the why behind all the tricky statistical stuff.
Right.
That's what we want to help you achieve today,
Yeah.
right? So we're going to tap into all these great insights that RoleCatcher has about these roles, about how to prepare for the interview.
Awesome.
And we're going to give you like the ultimate prep guide.
I love that.
So you can really ace that interview, okay?
And what's so cool about these roles is it's not just about being good at math, right?
Right.
It's about how you apply it. It's about that statistical thinking.
That mindset. Yeah,
that mindset. And that really shines through in the interview.
Okay, so before we get into the really hard stuff, the interview questions, let's just take a step back and make sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
What does a statistical assistant actually do?
Yeah. Exactly.
RoleCatcher kind of breaks it down into like, you're collecting data, you're analyzing data, you're creating reports and visuals, right?
Big one. Yeah.
And then, importantly, you're taking all that and you're helping organizations make good decisions.
Yeah, you're translating that data into something.
Yeah, actionable stuff.
Actionable, understandable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's like the big picture.
Yeah, and you can do that in so many different places.
Oh, right.
Right. So you could be in like a crazy busy corporate office.
Yeah.
You could be in a research lab.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Totally different vibe.
Okay.
And these days you can even do it all from home.
Remotely, yeah.
Remotely.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so ready to get into the nitty-gritty,
Let's do it.
the actual interview questions.
I'm excited.
So RoleCatcher's got this top 10 list of like the most common questions you're going to face.
Okay.
And we're going to break them down one by one.
Love it.
All right, so question number 1. Can you explain the difference between descriptive and inferential statistics?
Okay, a classic.
Why do you think this is always
It is a good one.
the first question?
Yeah, it's like they're testing the foundation, right?
All right, yeah.
Making sure you're not
Got it.
just BSing your way through it.
Yeah.
Do you actually get it?
Yeah.
The difference between just describing what you see in the data
Okay.
and then actually using it
Yeah.
to make predictions
Yeah, okay.
for a larger group.
Like, what can we learn from this data?
Yeah, exactly.
Right, got it.
It's like looking at a single tree
Oh, I like that.
versus understanding the whole forest.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're hit with this question.
Yeah.
What's the difference between descriptive
Right.
and inferential statistics?
Keep it simple.
Okay.
Clear and concise.
Yeah.
You could say something like, descriptive statistics, that's all about summarizing the data.
Okay.
Giving a snapshot of what we've observed.
Right.
Median, mode, that kind of stuff.
Those are all the descriptive stats.
Exactly. And then you say inferential statistics, that's where we take it a step further.
Right.
We're using a sample to
Yeah.
make predictions about a larger population.
Okay, so that's where it gets more.
Yeah.
Like using a survey to understand like nationwide opinions, that kind of thing.
Got it.
Okay, so nice and straightforward, good definitions,
right?
But I bet they don't stop there.
They're going to dig deeper.
What kind of follow-up
For sure.
questions could they ask?
So they might ask you for a specific example. Right.
Yeah.
Like, give me an example of a descriptive statistic.
Okay.
Give me an example of an inferential statistic.
Got it.
Or they might say, okay, you've got this data.
Yeah.
How do you choose the right method?
Based on the data.
Yeah.
Okay.
Based on the data and the research question.
So you really got to know.
Yeah.
Not just the words.
You got to understand it.
But like what it means and how to apply it.
Exactly.
Okay, and that's where...
And that's where RoleCatcher's AI can be super helpful.
Oh, okay. Tell me more about that.
Yeah. So like their AI, it can actually read the job description.
Wow.
And then it tailors your answers.
Oh, that's cool.
To that specific job.
It knows what they're looking for.
Yeah, it's like having a personalized cheat sheet.
Okay, I like it.
For each interview.
All right, so on to question number 2. Can you explain the concept of statistical significance?
Okay.
This is where I start thinking p-values.
P-value. It's all about p-values.
And like those magic thresholds.
Yeah, but it's more than just the numbers, right?
Yeah.
It's about understanding the weight of evidence.
Okay.
They want to know, do you get how we use statistical significance to say, hey, is this finding real?
Right.
Or is it just random chance?
Yeah, so it's like...
It's about separating signal from noise.
A real signal versus just randomness.
Exactly. Like, is there something actually going on here?
Okay, so... They hit you with this question, right? How do you answer that without getting too in the weeds?
Simple. Focus on what it means.
Okay.
You can say statistical significance helps us make good decisions based on the data.
So it's practical.
Yeah, super practical.
Okay.
You're saying, look, it tells us if a result is likely real, not just random variation.
Okay.
And we use this thing called a p-value. And if it's below a certain level, usually 0.05.
Oh, yeah, 0.05, yeah.
We consider it statistically significant, meaning
Yeah.
it's probably not just due to chance.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's probably a real effect. We should pay attention.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's it.
I like it.
Nice and simple.
Nice and simple.
But again,
But I bet they don't
we might keep going.
let you off that easy.
Oh, yeah.
What are some follow-ups they could ask?
So they could get into, like, the limitations of p-values.
Oh, interesting.
Right.
Yeah, because it's not
a perfect
a perfect measure.
Yeah, and they might ask,
Okay.
how do you interpret this in different situations?
Okay.
Right.
Got it.
Or they might even bring up type I and type 2 errors.
Oh, those are scary.
Yeah, that's getting a little bit more
Advanced. But, we
Yeah.
got to be ready for it.
Got to be prepared.
Okay, so that's kind of a nice segue
Yeah.
to question number
Right.
3.
Okay.
Can you explain the difference between a population and a sample?
Right.
This one seems pretty straightforward.
It does.
But I bet there were some little.
But, even with the simple ones,
Yeah.
you got to be crystal clear.
Yeah. That's true.
Because they're testing. Can you actually articulate these basic concepts?
Shows you understand it.
Yeah, it shows you're not just throwing around jargon.
Yeah.
You get it.
All right, so how do we tackle this one?
So keep it simple. Focus on the definitions.
Oh.
Say something like, a population, that's the whole group we're interested in.
Okay.
Right?
Got it.
Like, all the voters in a country.
Okay.
A sample is just a piece of that.
Right, it's like a subset.
Yeah, a smaller group, carefully chosen
Okay.
to represent the whole thing.
So it's got to be representative.
It's got to be representative.
Okay.
That's key.
And I bet those real-world examples can really
They love that.
help the interviewer see.
Yeah, they want to see that you get it.
You get it.
Okay.
And it also sets you up for follow-up questions.
Like what?
Like they might say, okay, how would you actually choose
Yeah.
a representative sample?
Good question.
What are some common sampling methods? Things like that.
All right, before we move on to the next question,
Okay.
I want to touch on something RoleCatcher talks about in their career advice, right? They're big on this idea of continuous learning.
Super important.
For statistical assistants, right?
Yeah, because the field is always changing. New tools, new techniques.
Everything.
All the time.
Got to stay curious.
Got to keep learning.
And they actually have like personalized recommendations based on your experience.
Based on where you are.
Or where you want to go.
And where you want to go.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's like your own little...
career advisor.
Okay, so back to the questions.
Back to the questions.
Question number 4.
Okay.
Can you explain the difference between a parameter and a statistic?
All right.
This is one where I always have to pause and think.
I know it's subtle, but it's important.
Oh.
A parameter describes the whole population, the entire group.
Right.
A statistic, that's just describing the sample.
Got it.
The smaller group.
Okay, so it's like the parameter is the true...
The true value.
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing we're trying to estimate, and the statistic.
It's like our best guess.
It's our best guess.
Based on the data we have.
Based on the data we have.
Okay, so going back to our voting example.
Yeah.
The percentage of all voters who support a candidate. That would be a parameter.
Parameter.
But the percentage of voters in our sample who support that candidate.
That's the statistic.
That's the statistic, okay.
Yeah. Good example.
Got it.
And they might ask follow-up questions like, why do we even bother with statistics?
Yeah, why not just measure the whole population?
Why are we estimating?
Yeah, good point.
We can mess up our estimates.
Okay, so they're really testing.
Yeah, they want to see
if you understand the nuances. Okay, I feel a little bit better about that one now.
Yeah?
On to question number 5.
Okay, hit me.
Can you explain the concept of correlation?
All right, correlation.
This one always makes me think of scatter plots.
Yeah, visualization.
Seeing those trends in the data.
Exactly. It's all about relationships, right?
Okay, so positive correlation, things move together.
Moves together.
Negative correlation, they move
opposite
directions. And the strength tells us.
The strength tells us how tight that relationship is.
Okay, so strong correlation, very predictable.
Very predictable.
Weak correlation.
Looser relationship.
It could be anything. Okay.
Yeah, not so clear.
Got it.
Yeah.
So how do you answer this question
so
in a way that really shows that you understand it?
Again, clear definitions.
Okay.
Real-world examples. But here's the key.
Yeah.
Correlation does not equal causation.
Oh, right.
Gotta emphasize that.
Okay, yeah, good point.
So you can say correlation measures how closely two things are related.
Okay.
Like ice cream sales and temperature.
Oh, good example.
Right.
Yeah.
As it gets hotter.
Yeah.
More ice cream.
More ice cream sales.
But that doesn't mean...
It doesn't mean that
eating ice cream makes it hot.
Makes it hot outside?
Yeah.
There might be other things going on.
Okay. And I bet they're going to try and trick you with that.
Oh, they'll test you on that.
What are some follow-up questions they could ask?
So they might say...
Give me an example of a negative correlation.
Okay.
Or how do you interpret this correlation coefficient?
Okay.
Like, what does a 0.8 actually mean versus a 0.2?
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Or even, can you think of a case where two things are correlated, but one doesn't cause the other?
Oh, I like those thought-provoking questions. Okay, now, before we jump into the next question, I want to point out something else that RoleCatcher really emphasizes.
Okay.
And it's this idea of building a strong portfolio.
The portfolio.
Sure, Statistical Assistant.
So important.
Why is that so important?
Because it shows not just that you know the stuff, but that you can actually do it.
Right, it's like proof.
Yeah, real-world proof.
Okay.
So, putting those projects, demonstrating those skills.
And they actually give advice.
They do.
On, building a portfolio.
Yeah.
It's tailored to the roles.
Tailored to the roles, that's key.
You're going for...
Because different jobs need different things.
Okay, so it's not one size fits all.
No.
Got it. Got to be specific.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
So, are we ready for a few more questions?
Let's do it.
Okay. Question number 6. Can you explain the difference between a one-tailed and a two-tailed test?
All right, back to hypothesis testing.
This one takes me back to stats class, and I'm not sure if I'm happy about it.
It can be a bit tricky.
Yeah.
But it's all about direction, right?
Yeah.
One-tailed test, you've got a hunch about which way it's going to go.
You're like, I think it's going to go up.
Yeah, exactly.
Or I think it's going to go down.
Yeah.
Two-tailed.
Two-tailed, you're like, open.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I just think it's going to be different.
Something's going to happen. I don't know what.
Okay.
That's two-tailed.
Got it.
Yeah. So if we're testing a drug and we think it's going to lower blood pressure.
One-tailed.
That's one-tailed.
Because we're only interested if it goes down.
Okay.
Not up.
But if we're just like, does this drug do anything to the blood pressure?
Two-tailed.
Two-tailed, yeah.
Got it.
It's like, searching for a specific address.
Oh, okay.
Versus just, exploring the neighborhood.
Okay, so you're looking for something specific?
Specific versus just seeing what's out there.
Versus just seeing what's out there. Okay.
Yeah.
So they ask you this in an interview.
Right.
How do you explain it?
Keep it simple.
Okay.
Say, one-tailed, we have a direction in mind.
Okay.
Two-tailed, we're just looking for any difference.
Okay, so focus on the direction?
Yeah, the direction of the hypothesis.
Okay.
And then, of course, give an example.
Right, like the blood pressure example.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and then I bet they're going to...
Oh, they're going to ask some follow-ups.
Like, how does this affect the p-value?
Oh, yeah.
Right, how do you interpret the result?
So they could even get into the p-value.
Yeah, they might even ask you to design a test.
Okay.
And choose...
Based on the research question.
The research question, exactly.
Okay, so you got to be ready
to be prepared.
To think on your feet.
Yeah.
All right, question number 7. Can you explain the concept of standard deviation? This one always makes me think of bell curves and...
Visualize it.
Yeah.
It's all about spread.
Yeah, how spread out the data is.
How spread out the data is.
Okay, so high standard deviation, data's all over the place.
Data's all over the place, yeah.
Low standard deviation.
Nice and tight.
Everyone's kind of clustered.
They're around the average.
Around the average, yeah.
Okay.
Simple concept, but it's powerful.
It is powerful, yeah. So how do we explain this in a way that really
makes sense?
Rare definition,
right.
Standard deviation, measure of spread.
All right.
High standard deviation, data's far from the average.
Right.
Low standard deviation, it's all clustered close.
Got it.
And then give a relatable example.
Okay, what's a good example?
Like compare the heights of basketball players.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Versus just regular people.
Regular folks.
Yeah, way more variation.
Yeah, they're going to be taller.
They're going to be taller.
On average, yeah.
Exactly.
And then I bet those examples lead to good follow-up questions.
Yeah, like...
what could they ask?
How does standard deviation relate to variance or range?
Oh, okay. Other measures.
Other measures of spread.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
How would you use it to compare different data sets?
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah. Or even, here's a standard deviation.
Okay. What does it mean?
Yeah. Interpret it.
In this situation.
Okay. So it's all about
understanding.
Really understanding what it means.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, before we go to the next one, I want to mention RoleCatcher's AI-powered interview practice tool.
Oh, this is a game changer.
What is that?
So it's like you're doing a mock interview.
Well, that's cool.
But with AI.
So you can practice.
Yeah, you practice.
Your answers.
You answer questions, and it gives you feedback.
Oh, that's cool.
Personalized feedback.
That's like you have a coach.
It's like having a coach.
But it's virtual.
Virtual.
I love that.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Okay, so question number 8.
Yeah.
Can you explain the difference between a null hypothesis and an alternative hypothesis?
All right, hypothesis testing again.
This one always felt a little bit like
abstract, yeah.
But it's actually pretty simple.
Okay.
Think of it like this. Null hypothesis, that's our starting point.
Okay.
Usually it's saying there's no effect.
Right.
Nothing's happening.
No difference.
No difference.
Yeah.
The alternative hypothesis.
Okay.
That's what we're trying to prove.
That's what we're actually interested in.
Yeah, that's where the action is.
Okay, so if we're testing a new drug, the null hypothesis is...
The drug does nothing.
It does nothing.
Yeah.
Alternative...
The drug does something.
It does something. Either good or bad.
Yeah. Could be good, could be bad. We don't know.
Okay, we just think it's
going to do something.
He could have an effect.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's like a trial.
I love the trial analogy.
Right.
Yeah.
The null hypothesis is innocent.
Innocent until proven guilty.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we're gathering evidence.
We're the detectives.
We're the data detectives.
Yeah, we're looking for clues.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So they hit you with this quotient in an interview.
Okay.
How do you explain it?
Keep it simple.
Okay.
Null hypothesis, no effect. Alternative hypothesis, there is an effect.
Got it. Expert speaker.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of statistical assistants. We're going to keep talking about those tricky interview questions and really help you understand what's going on.
I'm excited. Those questions really get the brain going.
Let's dive into a slightly more advanced concept that might pop up in an interview for a statistical assistant role, okay?
Okay, hit me.
Can you explain the difference between type I and type 2 errors?
Oh, yes. Type I and type 2 errors. I remember these from back in stats class. Definitely something worth revisiting.
It can be tricky, but it's really helpful to think about the consequences of each.
Okay, yeah, I'm ready.
A type I error is like a false positive.
Oh, okay.
We reject the null hypothesis when it's actually true.
Okay, so that means we think something's happening, but it's actually not.
Exactly. Think of it like convicting an innocent person.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
A type 2 error is like a false negative. We fail to reject the null hypothesis when it's actually false.
So we think nothing's happening, but something actually is.
You got it. It's like letting a guilty person go free.
Oh, I see. So both are undesirable, but they have very different implications.
Precisely. The interviewer wants to see you can connect the dots between these statistical concepts and their practical implications.
Okay, so how should someone approach this in an interview? How do you make sure they really understand the concept and its relevance?
Well, you start by defining each clear, use language everyone can understand. Say something like, a type I error occurs when we reject the null hypothesis when it's actually true.
Like, we conclude the drug is effective, but it's actually not.
Exactly. And for a type 2 error, you could say, it happens when we fail to reject the null hypothesis when it is actually false, like concluding a drug is ineffective when it really works.
And like we said before, real-world examples help people understand.
Yes. And then they might ask follow-up questions like, how can we minimize the risk of each type of error? Or what factors influence the likelihood of each type of error?
Oh, so they might ask us to really analyze what type of error is more concerning.
Exactly.
Okay, before we move on to the next question, I want to touch on something RoleCatcher emphasizes in their career guide.
Okay.
They talk about the importance of developing strong communication skills as a statistical assistant, like being able to explain those complex concepts to people who may not have a statics background.
Communication is key.
Yeah.
I got to translate those numbers into meaningful insights that anyone can understand.
Yeah. Does RoleCatcher offer any tips for how to do that?
Oh, yeah. They have a ton. They suggest practicing explaining statistical concepts to friends or family members, people who don't have a background in stats.
Oh, that's a smart. Like, explain it to your grandma.
Yeah, exactly.
I like that. Okay, ready for another question?
Hit me.
Okay, here's one that tests your understanding of some fundamental statistical terms. Can you explain the difference between a population and a sample?
Okay, yeah.
Population and sample, they seem simple enough, but I can see how it can be easy to mix up.
You've got to understand the difference between them to make accurate conclusions from data. It's something interviewers really look for.
Okay, so remind us of the definition and why it's so important to make that distinction.
A population is the entire group we're interested in studying. Think of it like all students in a school or all the registered voters in a city. A sample is a smaller group that is carefully selected from that population. It's the group we collect data from to make conclusions about the entire population.
So if we want to know the average height of all students in a school, that's our population. But, we can't measure every single student. It's not realistic.
Right. So we take a sample of, let's say, 100 students and use that data to estimate the average height of all the students.
Got it. So how should someone approach this question in an interview and make sure they are explaining it correctly?
Start by defining both terms in a way everyone can understand. Keep it simple. Say something like, a population is the entire group we're interested in, like all the customers of a company. A sample is a smaller group, carefully selected, like a group of 100 randomly chosen customers.
And real-world examples are always good.
Of course. And they also set you up for those follow-up questions. They might ask, how would you select a representative sample? Or what are some common sampling methods? They might even ask you to design a sampling strategy.
Before we go on, can we go back to something RoleCatcher talked about in their overview?
Sure.
They talked about this really cool feature. Their AI analyzes job descriptions to help people tailor their resume and cover letter.
Oh, yeah. It's like having a personal resume coach.
Really?
Their AI scans job descriptions and identifies the keywords, the skills that employers are looking for, and then suggests ways to incorporate those into your application.
So it's not just about having the right skills, it's about how you present them.
Exactly.
That's really cool. Okay, are you ready for another question?
Yes, I'm ready.
Can you explain the difference between a parameter and a statistic? This is one where I always have to stop and think.
It is subtle, but so important. A parameter describes a characteristic of the whole population, while a statistic just describes the sample.
Okay, so the parameter is the true underlying value that we're trying to estimate. And the statistic is our best guess based on the data we have.
Exactly.
So if we think back to our school example, the average height of all the students in the school, that would be the parameter. But the average of just those 100 students in our sample, that's the statistic.
Yes, a good example. The parameter represents the true value, and the statistic is our estimate.
And how good that estimate is depends on how well our sample represents the whole population.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So how should someone answer this question?
Well, you want to start by defining both terms very clearly, highlighting that key difference. You could say, a parameter is a numerical value that describes a characteristic of an entire population, like the average income of all households in a country. A statistic is a numerical value that describes a characteristic of a sample, like the average income of 100 randomly selected households. Then you explain why we use statistics to estimate the parameter.
Because measuring every single member of a population is almost impossible.
Exactly, and then bring in the real-world examples.
And those real-world examples lead to follow-up questions. They might ask, what factors affect the accuracy of our estimate? Or why random sampling is important. They may even ask you to identify whether a value is a parameter or a statistic.
You got it.
Now, before we move on, can we highlight something RoleCatcher talks about in their career guide?
Okay.
They emphasize that resumes and cover letters should be tailored to each specific job.
That's so important. A generic resume won't cut it anymore.
And RoleCatcher's AI tools can help with that, right?
Of course, it analyzes job descriptions to identify the keywords, skills, and experience the employer wants.
So it can help us really understand what they're looking for and put our best foot forward.
Yes.
Okay, ready for another interview question?
Yes, I'm ready.
Here's one that comes up a lot in data analysis roles. Can you explain the concept of correlation? It helps us understand the relationships between variables, but it can be tricky to explain.
Correlation is often misunderstood, so it's important to be able to explain it accurately.
Okay, remind us of the definition and why it's an important concept.
Correlation is a statistical measure that describes the strength and direction of the relationship between two variables.
So if we see a positive correlation between ice cream sales and temperature, it means that as the temperature goes up, ice cream sales also go up.
Exactly. And if we see a negative correlation between exercise and resting heart rate, it means that as exercise increases, resting heart rate tends to decrease.
Okay, so positive correlation means they move together. Negative correlation means they move in opposite directions.
Exactly, and the strength of the correlation tells us how closely related those two variables are.
So a strong correlation means they move together predictably, and a weak correlation is a looser relationship.
Exactly.
And we can't forget that common saying correlation does not equal causation.
Right. Just because two variables are correlated, it doesn't mean one causes the other. There might be other factors. For example, there might be a positive correlation between the number of firefighters at a fire and the amount of damage.
Oh, that's interesting.
But that doesn't mean that having more firefighters causes more damage. It's more likely because the larger fires require more firefighters, which then leads to more damage.
Okay, that's a really good example. So how should we answer this question to make sure we're showing that we understand it completely?
Start by defining correlation simply, you could say. Correlation is a statistical measure that tells us how closely two variables are related. It ranges from -1 to +1, where -1 indicates a perfect negative correlation, +1 indicates a perfect positive correlation, and 0 indicates no correlation.
Okay, so make sure to mention that range.
Yes, and then include a real-world example, and make sure to highlight that distinction between correlation and causation. You could say, we might observe a positive correlation between ice cream sales and temperature, but that doesn't mean eating ice cream causes temperatures to rise. There might be other factors involved.
I'm sure they will ask a bunch of follow-up questions to make sure you understand. Like, can you give an example where two variables are correlated but not causally related? Or how would you interpret a correlation coefficient of 0.8 versus 0.2? They may even ask, what are some common statistical methods for analyzing correlations?
Exactly. Be prepared to discuss those nuances to show you understand it.
Before we go to the next question, let's mention something else RoleCatcher brought up in their guide.
Okay.
The importance of networking.
Networking is so important in any field, but especially in data.
They suggest going to industry events, joining professional organizations, and connecting with other data professionals online.
It's all about building relationships and knowledge sharing, and you never know what doors will open.
I think RoleCatcher even has a feature that can help you with this, right?
They do. Their platform allows you to connect with other data professionals, and you can even search for potential mentors.
Wow, so it's like LinkedIn, but just for data people.
Yeah, think of it like that.
Okay, I love that. Ready for another question?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay, this is another one that tends to trip people up. Can you explain the concept of a sampling distribution?
Sampling distributions are fundamental for understanding how we can use samples to learn about populations. It's all about understanding the variability in a statistic from a sample.
Can you break that down? What exactly is a sampling distribution and why is it so important?
Imagine you're trying to estimate the average height of all students at a school, but you can't measure every single student. So you take a random sample of 100 students and you calculate their average height. Now imagine doing this many times. Each time, you'll get a different average height. The distribution of all of those sample averages, that's the sampling distribution.
Okay, so it's not about the individual data points, it's about the distribution of the statistic we are looking at.
Yes, understanding that distribution helps us understand how much variability we can expect in our sample statistics and how confident we can be in using them to estimate a population parameter.
So if the sample distribution is narrow, it means our sample statistic is likely to be close to the true population parameter.
Exactly.
But if it's wide, there is more variability, so it might not be as accurate.
Exactly.
This is a hard concept to explain, so how do we approach this one?
Start by defining it clearly, using a real-world example. You could say, imagine we want to estimate the average income of all households in a city, but we can't collect data from every household. So we take multiple random samples of 100 households and calculate the average income of each one. The distribution of all of those sample averages is the sampling distribution of the mean. Then go on to explain why the sampling distribution is important for statistical inference.
And I bet those real-world examples are going to lead to follow-up questions like, why is this important for confidence intervals and hypothesis testing? Or how does the central limit theorem relate?
Yes, and you might even be asked to sketch a sampling distribution.
Okay, before we move on, RoleCatcher mentioned something in their career guide about the importance of mentorship. Did you see that?
Yes.
Finding mentors and building relationships with more experienced people in the data field.
Mentorship can be so helpful. A mentor can offer advice and support, help you navigate those tricky situations you are bound to run into.
And RoleCatcher even has a feature where you can connect with potential mentors.
They do. You can connect and discover new opportunities. It's a great way to learn and grow.
Okay, ready for another question?
I'm ready.
Can you explain the concept of statistical significance? I hear this term thrown around all the time, but I'm not even sure I really understand what it means.
It's a key concept in hypothesis testing, and it's about determining if the results we see in our data are due to a real effect or just random chance.
So if a result is statistically significant, it means we have strong evidence to support our hypothesis.
Exactly. It means we have enough evidence to reject the null hypothesis and conclude there is a relationship or a difference.
Okay, and how do we determine if something is statistically significant? I remember something about a p-value.
Yes, the p-value is a probability value that tells us how likely it would be to observe our results if the null hypothesis were true. If that value is low, typically below 0.05, we consider it statistically significant.
The lower the p-value, the more surprising the result would be if there was no effect.
Exactly.
Okay, how do we approach this question without getting too technical?
Explain it in a way that's easy to understand. You could say, statistical significance helps us determine if the result is likely due to a real effect or just random chance. It helps us be confident in our findings. Then go on to explain the p-value. You can say, we use the p-value to measure this likelihood. If it's below a certain point, usually 0.05, we consider it statistically significant.
Are there any common mistakes people make when answering this question?
Sometimes people will forget to talk about the practical implication of statistical significance. Make sure you show that you understand how this concept is applied. They might ask, what are some limitations of using p-values? Or, can you explain the difference between statistical significance and practical significance? They might even give you a scenario and ask you to explain if the results are statistically significant.
I feel a lot more confident in my ability to answer that question now.
It's all about understanding the logic behind it and using it to make conclusions from the data.
Before we go to the next question, let's mention that RoleCatcher highlights the importance of having a good online presence, specifically LinkedIn.
Yes, LinkedIn is essential for career advancement. You can connect with other professionals, follow companies, and search for jobs.
And RoleCatcher offers tips for optimizing your profile.
They do. They can help you create a compelling profile to attract recruiters.
That's great. I'm going to spend some time updating mine. Okay, ready for another question?
Yes, let's go.
Here's one that often causes confusion. Can you explain the difference between a one-tailed and a two-tailed test?
This one can be tricky, but it's all about the direction.
Okay.
A one-tailed test is used when we have a specific direction in mind for the effect we are testing. Like, if we're testing a drug to see if it lowers blood pressure, we are only looking to see if it decreases blood pressure.
Okay, so that would be one-tailed. What about a two-tailed test?
A two-tailed test is more general. We use it when we want to see if there's any difference between groups. We don't care which direction.
So, if we are testing if the drug has any effect on blood pressure at all, whether it increases or decreases, that's when we use a two-tailed test.
Yeah.
How can we explain this concept clearly and concisely?
Start by explaining what each type of test is and when to use each one. Say something like, a one-tailed test is used when we have a directional hypothesis, meaning we are predicting that one group will be higher or lower than the other. A two-tailed test is used when we have a non-directional hypothesis, meaning we just think there will be a difference, but we don't care which direction, and then give a real-world example.
Okay, and I bet they'll have follow-up questions.
Of course, they might ask you to choose the right type of test based on a scenario.
Before we move on, I want to touch on one more thing from RoleCatcher's Career Guide. They talk about the importance of building a portfolio, showcasing your skills through real-world projects.
It's a great way to impress potential employers.
And it's more than just a list of skills.
Exactly. They can see what you've done.
Does RoleCatcher have any tips for building a good portfolio?
They do. They have tips on choosing projects that showcase your skills, presenting your work in a compelling way, and tailoring it to different jobs.
Okay, great. Are you ready for another question?
Yes, fire away.
Can you explain the concept of standard deviation?
It's a fundamental measure of variability. It tells us how spread out our data is.
Okay, remind us of the definition of standard deviation and why it's important.
Standard deviation is a measure of how much our data points are spread out from the average. Think of it like a ruler. A high standard deviation means the data is spread out, and a low standard deviation means it's more clustered together.
So if we are looking at the height of a group of people, a high standard deviation means a wide range of heights. But a low standard deviation means everyone is about the same height.
Yes, and understanding that can help us compare different groups, identify outliers, and assess the reliability of estimates.
Okay, how should we approach this one in an interview?
Define standard deviation in a way that is easy to understand. You can say, standard deviation is a measure of how spread out our data is. It tells us how much individual data points typically differ from the average. Then you can give a real-world example, like if we're looking at the heights of a group of basketball players, we expect to see a higher standard deviation than if we were looking at just a random group of people. That's because basketball players tend to be taller, so there is more variation in their heights.
I'm sure that example will lead to more questions.
Probably, they might ask, how does standard deviation relate to other measures of variability, like variance or range? Or, can you explain how to calculate it?
Okay, great. Anything else we should highlight from the RoleCatcher Career Guide before we move on?
Yes, they talk about the importance of continuous learning and professional development. Always be learning.
Yeah, the data field is changing so fast. New tools and technology all the time.
Exactly. Always be learning. And RoleCatcher can help you do that. They have personalized recommendations based on your goals.
That's great. Okay, ready for our last question?
Yes, let's do it.
Can you explain the difference between a null hypothesis and an alternative hypothesis?
Ah, yes. This concept is fundamental to drawing conclusions from data.
I always struggled with this concept. It's so abstract.
Think of them as two competing explanations for the data.
Okay.
The null hypothesis is our starting assumption. Usually it says there is no effect between the variables we're studying.
Okay.
And then the alternative hypothesis suggests that there is an effect.
So if we are testing a new drug, the null hypothesis would be that the drug has no effect on blood pressure, and the alternative would be that it does affect blood pressure.
Exactly.
So it's like a trial, where the null hypothesis is innocent until proven guilty.
I like that analogy.
We need strong enough evidence to reject the null hypothesis and support the alternative hypothesis.
Exactly.
Okay, how do we approach this question in an interview?
Define both terms very clearly. Something like, the null hypothesis is a statement that assumes there is no effect or relationship. The alternative hypothesis suggests that there is a relationship. And then give a real-world example. If we're studying the effects of a new fertilizer on plant growth, the null hypothesis would be that the fertilizer has no effect on growth, while the alternative would be that it does, either positive or negative.
And those real-world examples lead to follow-up questions. How do you choose between the two? Or what are some mistakes people make when formulating them? They might even give you a scenario and ask you to come up with a null and alternative.
Exactly. You're absolutely right. Being prepared to discuss those nuances shows you really get it.
Okay, so before we hit our final question, I wanted to touch on something that RoleCatcher mentioned about using their AI to prep for interviews with specific companies.
Yeah, that's a game changer.
So what is that?
Their AI can actually analyze job descriptions and highlight what each employer is really looking for.
So it's not just generic advice.
No, it's tailored
to that specific...
to that company.
And that company.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's like having an insider's guide.
Okay, I like that a lot.
To the interview. All right, are we ready for the last question?
Let's do it.
On RoleCatcher's Top 10.
I'm ready.
Okay, here it is. Can you explain the concept of a sampling distribution?
Okay.
Now, this one always takes me back to my stats class. And I'm not sure it's a good memory.
I know, it can be a bit abstract, but it's really important. It helps us understand how we use samples to make inferences about a larger population.
Okay, got it.
So imagine this. You take a bunch of samples from the same population, and for each sample, you calculate some statistic, like the average.
Okay, the average, got it.
The distribution of all those sample averages.
Yeah.
That's your sampling distribution.
Yeah. Okay, so it's not about the individual data points.
No.
It's about the distribution of
the distribution of the statistic.
Statistic itself.
Across many samples.
Right, okay.
Gives you a sense of how much our estimates might vary.
Got it.
And that's really important.
So it's like, how confident can we be?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I can already imagine some listeners right now are saying, okay, this sounds complicated. How do I explain this in an interview? I'm going to freeze up.
You don't have to freeze up. Keep it simple.
Okay.
Relatable. You could say, imagine you want to know the average height of everyone in a city.
Right.
But you can't measure everyone, right?
That would take forever.
It's impossible.
Okay.
So you take a bunch of random groups of, say, 100 people.
Okay.
And find the average height of each group.
Got it.
The spread of all those averages.
Yeah.
That's your sampling distribution.
Okay. And then, to tie it back to the bigger picture.
You could say, this distribution helps us understand how much our sample average might differ from the true average of the entire city.
Right. Okay.
It's all about...
So it's a measure of confidence.
With confidence.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, and then...
But then, of course...
You can already hear the follow-up questions.
Oh, yeah. Here they come, like,
Why is this important for hypothesis testing?
Okay. Or, how does the central limit theorem...
The central limit theorem...
play a role?
Exactly.
Yeah, so you got to be ready for those.
You got to be ready to go a little bit deeper.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah.
We've officially covered all 10 of RoleCatcher's top
That's awesome.
Statistical Assistant interview questions.
I feel like we've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, I feel a lot more confident than when we started.
Yeah, it's all about practice and preparation.
And remember, RoleCatcher's AI.
That AI can be your secret weapon.
It can really help you tailor those answers.
For each specific company.
To each specific company.
And they also have
great advice.
Career advice.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, they talk about all the different career stages that a statistical assistant...
It's a field with a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, and just reading through that, I'm like, wow, there's so much you can do.
Yeah, you can start as a statistical assistant.
Right.
Build those foundational skills.
Right. Get that experience.
Yeah, data collection, analysis, visualization. And then you move up.
You move on up, yeah.
Senior statistical analyst.
Okay.
Senior statistical analyst.
Wow.
You could even become consultant.
Statistical consultant.
Yeah, so much you can do.
So there's real career progression.
A clear path.
A clear path, yeah.
You're not just stuck in one spot.
Okay, and RoleCatcher actually gives you details on each of those stages.
They do. They tell you what you'd be doing.
Right.
What skills you need.
The skills, yeah.
Even potential salary.
Oh, okay, so it's like a roadmap.
It's a roadmap
for
your data career.
So for all our listeners out there who are maybe prepping for these interviews, don't be scared.
Don't be scared.
You've got this.
You got this.
Just prepare.
Yeah.
Understand the concepts.
Use
those resources. Use the resources. RoleCatcher's amazing.
RoleCatcher. Yeah,
you can totally nail it, right?
Confidence is key.
And enthusiasm. Let that shine through.
Yeah, be excited about data.
Yeah, they want to see that passion.
Well, this has been a fantastic deep dive.
It has been fun.
I feel a lot more confident now.
Me too.
So, until next time.
Yeah.
Keep exploring that world of data.
Until next time on the Deep Dive In.